Well, here we are. We have officially crossed the first quarter of the NHL season. So I think it's time we look at what's wrong with some of our favorite teams. First up, it's the Calgary Flames, the team who's given up the fewest goals this season. They're also a top 10 scoring team so far. So maybe there's not a ton wrong with them. One thing that jumped out at me was 5 OT losses. So maybe their place in the standings is a little bit inflated, although you could also make the argument that since they've been in close games and they've kept it tight long enough, maybe they deserve those points, where a team that's getting beat soundly in 3 periods, they just don't deserve to be as high. Maybe it's not the things that are wrong with the Flames. Maybe it's some of the things that are a little bit too right. So far, they've had phenomenal goaltending from Markstrom and Vladar. And could you see maybe a step back in that? Are they relying too heavily on that tandem? They've racked up quite a few shutouts already. They're putting up amazing numbers. The other guy maybe to look at would be Andrew Mangiapane. He's had a great start to the season. At one point, shooting percentage was over 30%. I think it's around 27 right now. And you might see a bit of a drop off there, a regression to the mean, so to speak. So if that starts to cool down, if some more goals start going in, you could see this team slide a little bit. And next, we'll take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, much like their Alberta cousins, having quite a good season so far. The only thing I really found that's wrong with the team so far is the 5-on-5 numbers. Their power play is through the roof, and their shorthanded is also right at the top of the league. But it seems that the 5-on-5 numbers just aren't balancing out. I could only imagine if they were doing as well 5-on-5 as they were on special teams, they might not have even lost a game this year. Let's have a look at the Montreal Canadiens. As much as there are a lot of things going right with the Oilers and the Flames, there's just nothing going right at all for Montreal. I don't think it would be fair to ask a team that loses its number one defenseman and captain, its number one all-star franchise goalie, and its top 200-foot and very important center all in one offseason, and then expect them to be better than they were the season previous. Montreal was able to bring in some players over the offseason, but they just haven't been the same level as the guys that they're missing. Now, I know what everyone's going to say. Hey, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals last year. But when you really look at it, it was a bit of a Cinderella story. And the team through the regular season wasn't even really that great to begin with. Okay, let's take a look at the Ottawa Senators next. I really think what's wrong with them is they're just not ready yet. The team has had struggles in goal this year, namely Matt Murray, who was waived and sent down to the minors. Unfortunately, things just really aren't working out for him. I think it was an ill-advised contract when they signed it, given the past couple season histories for Murray when he was still with the Penguins. Hopefully he can bounce back a little, and Ottawa will have at least someone reliable back there stopping pucks. They have a lot of really good young talent, and unfortunately they really just don't have a solid core or a foundation to build on that'll help them along the way with the growing pains. I do hope that the Sens don't panic and make any hasty decisions that they're going to regret later. Staying in Ontario, we'll have a look next at the Toronto Maple Leafs. What's wrong with the Leafs? Well, nothing. They're rolling right along. They've got one of the best records in hockey, and I think they've won the 15 of the last 17 games they've played in November. That's what's wrong with the Maple Leafs. They always seem to play really well during the regular season, and I know, believe me, I've heard it enough. They seem to come up short in the playoffs. I think most people in the fan base and around the league are sort of looking at anything the Leafs do during the regular season and basically saying, who cares? It's not like they're going to be able to shake off the playoff demons in November or December or whatever month it happens to be that isn't April, May, and June. Well, there's really only one thing wrong with the Maple Leafs. It's been the same thing that's been wrong with them for the past couple of seasons. They have no cap space. They have basically no room for anyone to get hurt, for players to be called up or sent down. They're just that up against the cap. If you recall, the Leafs got bit twice by the waiver bug when both Michael Amadio and Adam Brooks were claimed on waivers because the team simply couldn't afford to keep them on the roster because of the salary cap. Couple other quick ones. Peter Mrazek's health. He's barely spent any time with the team, and who knows what's going to happen. I know Joseph Wall's come in and he's won 3 games, but I hardly think anyone wants him to be long-term solution as backup for this season. And while we're talking about goaltenders, Jack Campbell has been unbelievable. But again, if he falters and falls back a little bit, some of those close games that the Leafs were able to win may start turning into losses. The Vancouver Canucks, what's wrong with them? Everything. Really, the one thing that's wrong with the Canucks is the organization just can't make up their mind on what they want to do. I think most people from around the league could look at the Vancouver Canucks and wonder why they haven't completely blown it up yet. You can look back to even when the Sedins retired and say that would have been the perfect opportunity for them to peel it back, take a couple of years, liquidate their assets, stockpile draft picks and young players. And really, they would have been already out of that mess that they find themselves in now. The team spent a lot of money on sort of mid-level talent players that they brought in for a little bit too much money and a little bit too much term. And they've cycled through that a couple of times. And just as the Canucks were about to get rid of the contracts of Jay Beagle, Antoine Roussel, and Louis Eriksson, remember that contract? Those guys were all going to expire at the end of this season, and all that cap space would have been the Canucks to spend on whatever players they wanted. They went and traded those players for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Now, they, of course, did get Connor Garland back in that trade too, and he's a good player. They also promptly signed him to a long-term deal for a big ticket as well. Ekman-Larsson's contract is another 5 years after this one, and the Canucks are in for just over $7 million against the cap. I'll tell you, I'd rather take those 3 players that they moved in that deal and just let those wash off the books at the end of the year. And then I'm free to spend that money on whatever I want. Sure, Connor Garland is a good player, but in order to make that deal, look what they had to take on. It's just not a smart move. And what are we left with in Vancouver? Just not a very good hockey team and a completely ticked off fan base that's looking for blood. Okay, here we are. It's the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets aren't doing terribly. They're currently quite a ways out of a playoff spot, but I think what's really gone wrong with them this year is they just can't score. Earlier in the week, I was looking up some of the expected goals for stats for Winnipeg, and I noticed that they've had about 12 games since late October in which they scored fewer goals than expected. Now, the Jets do have a lot of good players. They have a very talented team. They have a great goalie, and they've got a good mix of young players and veterans. So I think they'll be able to turn around. But if they don't do it soon, they're going to find themselves on the outside looking in at the playoffs. Let's go one last team, the Seattle Kraken. And what's wrong with the Kraken? Well, that's easy. Goaltending. Philip Grubauer, the guy Seattle went out and spent a whole lot of money on, has been statistically the worst goalie in the league when you look at expected saves and expected goals against. He's almost giving up 1 goal a game more than he should if he was an average goalie. So it's obviously a big problem. The team is 29th in goals against. They're actually mid-pack goals for, which even for them is maybe a little bit surprising because it didn't seem like they were going to be a juggernaut offensive team. So even to be middle pack is probably better than expected. They just really need to fix the goaltending situation. And Grubauer is a better goalie than what he's shown. He just has to find it again and start making saves. Maybe the thing that's really wrong with the Kraken is they just didn't take enough guys that I told them to. All right, Canada, that's what's wrong with your favorite teams. And you too, Seattle. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Click like and hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time.